Welcome to BFR Radio, a podcast dedicated to all things blood flow restriction training. This podcast is proudly sponsored by the BFR.co, where if you want to buy your own BFR cuffs, access online BFR training programs, increase your own BFR knowledge with the accredited BFR.co course, or you want more information about this type of training, this is your one place to go. And I'm your host, Dr. Chris Gavilio. Welcome back to BFR Radio and to the second episode focusing on aerobic BFR exercise. In the last episode, we explored how low-intensity BFR walking led to improvements in VO2 max in trained basketball athletes over just 2 weeks. For this week, we're moving from the treadmill and onto the bike. But before we dive into today's study, let's quickly revisit a previous episode where we looked at a study by De Oliveira and colleagues in 2016. In this short-term 4-week training study, 37 recreational active participants were assigned to one of 4 groups: low-intensity cycling with BFR, low-intensity cycling without BFR, a high-intensity interval HIIT, and a combination alternating between the HIIT and the low-intensity BFR. Each group trained 3 times per week on a stationary bike. The protocol involved 2 sets of 5 to 8 repetitions, each repetition lasting 2 minutes, with 1 minute passive rest in between and 5 minutes of rest between sets. Why it was 5 to 8 is that over the 4 weeks, they increased the number of repetitions per set. The low-intensity group trained steady state at 30% of their peak power output for the 2-minute rep. The HIIT group, that high-intensity training group, on the other hand, for each 2-minute rep, completed a 4-stage descending interval, starting at 110% of their peak power max, decreasing every 30 seconds to 105, 100, and 95%. The percentage decrease in power format was used for every repetition. Makes sense. It's pretty hard to hold that high peak power wattage. Therefore, decreasing it every 30 seconds will make it somewhat achievable. With respect to the BFR cuffs in this study, they were placed on the thighs and inflated to 140 millimeters of mercury in week 1 and progressing by 20 millimeters each week until they reached 200 millimeters of mercury by week 4. In total, each session lasted around 30 to 40 minutes. In the combined group, they alternated sets between the low-intensity BFR protocol and the HIIT non-BFR protocol. After 4 weeks, all groups improved their lactate threshold. This is the point at which lactic acid begins to accumulate in the blood. However, only the BFR, the HIIT, and the combined groups of the HIIT and the BFR improved their VO2 max and maximal power output. Interestingly, only the BFR group improved isometric leg strength by 11%. So in summary, BFR cycling at low intensity was the only method to produce gains in both aerobic capacity and leg strength, showing its unique value as a concurrent stimulus for endurance and muscular adaptation. Fast forward to 2022, and we've got a much larger and more comprehensive study. This one focuses on road cyclists, men aged 35 to 49, who were already cycling over 200 kilometers a week. Although the participants were a little older, they were a much larger number of participants. But more importantly, this group is more representative of an athletic population, something which is very hard to get in any kind of training study. The article we're reviewing today is called Physiological Adaptations to High-Intensity Interval Training Combined with BFR in Masters Road Cyclists. In the study, 50 of these athletes were split into 3 groups. The first was a continuous training group. This is the control, a high-intensity interval training group, and thirdly, a high-intensity interval training plus BFR group, remembering in that previous study where they had that combination, very similar. Breaking down the training each group performed, all 3 groups did their regular endurance-based training, 4 sessions a week. Of these, 2 sessions were of 120 minutes in duration at 50 to 60% of their peak power output, And 2 sessions were 75 minutes at 65 to 70% peak power output. These were standard outdoor road rides for all of these cyclists. But the differentiating factor was what they did on the other 2 days per week. The continuous group, the control group, did another 75 minutes of continuous cycling at 65 to 70% of their peak power output. The high intensity interval training group performed 4-minute intervals at 80% peak power output with 2 minutes active recovery at 30% peak power output. And thirdly, the BFR and high intensity interval training group. They performed the same interval format, that's 4-minute intervals, except that the second and the fourth intervals were reduced to 60% of peak power output, and BFR cuffs were worn on both thighs. In these sessions, they maintained an RPM of 85 to 90. For the BFR, they used an 11 centimeter wide cuff and inflated the cuff to 30% of arterial occlusion pressure. The authors said that 30% of arterial occlusion was chosen for the BFR exercise, as 30 to 40% of arterial occlusion pressure was somewhat similar, and some cyclists expressed discomfort at 40%, but not at 30% of arterial occlusion pressure, performed in a previous pilot study work. This is a really interesting point. I personally advocate dropping BFR pressure by approximately 20 to 40 millimeters of mercury from the usual resistance training pressure, as holding the higher pressures during aerobic exercise becomes extremely difficult. Well, similar to the cyclists in the study, I find holding higher BFR pressures during aerobic exercise uncomfortable, affecting the ability to finish the session. Before we go through the results, let me clarify some of the terms that we'll go through. Firstly, VO2 max, potentially familiar for all of you. This is the maximal amount of oxygen the body can use during exercise. It's a gold standard measure of aerobic fitness. Next is ventilatory threshold. This is the point during exercise when breathing starts to become more rapid. It's a marker of how efficiently your body handles increasing intensity. Stroke volume, the amount of blood the heart pumps out with each beat. Bigger stroke volume equals more oxygen to the muscles. Cardiac output, the total volume of blood the heart pumps in a minute. It's stroke volume multiplied by heart rate. Vascular function, this is measured using flow-mediated dilation, and this assesses how well you're dilated. And this is an important indicator of heart and vessel health. And then there's muscle oxygen saturation. This is measured with a tissue saturation index, or a TSI. Lower values during exercise means that the muscles is extracting more oxygen, which is generally a good adaptation in trained muscles. And here's what they found over the 12 weeks. Firstly, VO2 max. They improved in all the 3 groups, with the control group increasing by 2 millimeters per kilogram per minute. The HIIT group improved by 3.9, and the BFR and high intensity interval group by 4.3 milliliters per kilogram per minute. That's an increase of about 3.5% for the control group and over 7% for both the HIIT and the combined BFR and HIIT interval training session. Solid improvements, especially for trained cyclists. The BFR interval training group had a significantly greater increase in absolute VO2 max compared to the control group. Stroke volume increased by 5 milliliters in the control group, 6 milliliters in the HIIT group, and 4 in the combined BFR and interval group. Cardiac output increased by approximately 1.1 to 1.3 liters per minute across all groups. Ventilatory threshold rose in all groups, meaning the cyclists could exercise harder before fatigue kicked in. And only the BFR interval group showed a statistically significant increase in arterial venous oxygen difference, going from 20.5 to 21.4, showing that the athlete's muscles became better at extracting oxygen. These cardiovascular improvements translated into better 40-kilometer time trial performance, and the BFR and interval and the HIIT groups improved significantly more than the control group, with time trial decreasing by 2.4% in the combined BFR and interval group and average power output increasing by 6.8%. The researchers also assessed muscle size and strength adaptations, looking at things like lean mass, muscle cross-sectional area, and torque output during knee movements. Here's where the BFR group really stands out. Only the BFR group showed increases in total lean mass, with an increase of 1 kilogram, and leg lean mass with a gain of 0.4 kilograms. MRI and ultrasound assessments showed significant increases in quadriceps and hamstring cross-sectional area and vastus lateralis thickness in only that BFR training group. In trained cyclists that do a really high aerobic volume, which means that it's quite hard to put on any kind of muscle, these are meaningful gains. Knee extension strength improved by 6.4%, and all three groups improved knee flexion strength, but the BFR group had the greatest peak torque increase of 14.8%. So BFR cycling not only improved endurance, it also significantly increased leg muscle size and strength, especially for the quads and the hamstrings. If we look at vascular and muscle oxygenation responses, in this part of the study, the researchers looked at changes in blood vessel function and how well the muscles used oxygen during exercise. I mentioned something about this flow-mediated dilation, or FMD. This is a test that looks at how well your blood vessels expand when blood flow increases. It's an important sign of vascular health, and better flow-mediated dilation means your arteries are more flexible and responsive, which lowers your risk of cardiovascular issues and supports overall endurance. Now, here's the interesting part. Only the BFR group showed a significant change in muscle oxygen saturation. It's measured by what's called a tissue saturation index, or TSI. With the BFR group, TSI dropped by 4.8%, which means that the muscles were pulling out more oxygen from the blood during exercise. This tells us that their muscles were working harder and had become more efficient at using oxygen. Why does that matter? Because better oxygen extraction helps with endurance and may contribute to the increases in muscle size and strength that was mentioned earlier. Overall, it means that the body is using its fuel systems more efficiently, a huge plus for performance. Now let's look at performance. The researchers looked at how each training method influenced cycling-specific performance outcomes, such as a 40-kilometer time trial, average power output, and how long the cyclists could sustain a very high-intensity effort. All three groups improved their 40-kilometer time trial times over to the 12-week period. The control group improved by 2.3%, the high-intensity group by 4.5%, and the BFR group by 5.1%. When looking at average power output during the time trial, the HIT group improved 5.5%, and the BFR group improved the most, 6.8%. In a high-intensity fatigue test at 150% of the athlete's peak power output, time to fatigue increased by 22% in the high-intensity interval training group and 31% in the combined BFR group. And total work capacity during this fatigue test also improved significantly, 19% in the HIT group and 25% in the BFR high-intensity combined group. These performance gains were strongly linked to increases in VO2 max and leg strength, while the BFR interval training group consistently showed the largest improvements across all markers. These performance gains were significantly correlated with increases in VO2 max and leg muscle strength, again strongest in the combined BFR high-intensity interval training group. So what can we take away from this? If you're a coach, athlete, or master's level cyclist, there's something there for all of us. Overall, adding just 2 BFR cycling sessions per week to your existing endurance training can yield simultaneous gains in aerobic fitness, muscular strength, and performance. The sessions are pretty straightforward. Perform 4 4-minute intervals. Set 1 and 3 are high intensity at 80% of peak power output without BFR, and sets 2 and 4 at 60% of peak power output whilst wearing the BFR cuffs. For the BFR, wear them on your thighs and inflate them to 30% of measured limb occlusion pressure. I feel that this is a very achievable pressure to hold for 4 minutes. For all sets, maintain a cadence of 85 to 90 RPM. Remember to also include a warm-up prior to the start of your first working set. This next bit is my own opinion, but something else to consider to potentially improve the performance outcome of this session is to do the following. Prior to the start of the session, perform a BFR warm-up protocol. 40 seconds of inflation, 20 seconds of deflation, 3 to 4 sets of increasing pressure. Then, for your first few minutes of the warm-up on the bike, consider riding with the cuffs inflated. As the intensity increases during the warm-up leading into the first set, decrease the pressure or just take them off. Ensure to warm up appropriately and spend some time approaching the 80% intensity before your first set. Then, after you finish your session, decrease the cuff pressure and spend another few minutes cycling during your cool down. Add in some quad, hip flexor and glute stretches as well. You get more bang for your buck. Strength and endurance improvements in the same session. That's rare, especially in trained athletes. In summary, this study highlights that BFR cycling isn't just a rehab tool. It's a performance tool. It's safe, it's effective, and it might just be one of the most efficient ways to train, especially for masters or aging athletes looking to optimize adaptations without overloading their joints or nervous system, or for elite athletes looking to maximize their lower intensity or additional sessions. And that's all for this episode. If you have any questions related to this, you can get in touch with me through my website, which is thebfr.co, or my socials at thebfr.co. You can also purchase your own BFR cuffs from our website, and you can find it at www.thebfr.co. And lastly, before I go, a couple of favors from me to you. If you know of someone who would benefit from this episode, please share it. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please give it a rating on iTunes. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep the pump.